Now, I realize that is a very thick book, and you're a very busy person, and you may have a difficult time just sitting down and reading the whole book from cover to cover. So I've done something special to it. Starting on page 1, I've marked it. At the bottom of the page is another page to turn to, page 16. When you get to page 16, you will find a few more verses have been marked. You'll be able to go throughout the book, and during about an hour and a half time of time, you'll be able to read it all. My friend, will you read it? And after you've read it, will you ask the Lord in your own way whether or not it is true? And they always tell me yes. Now, brothers and sisters, I stopped counting the number of books that I had given to non-members after I'd gotten to 500. This was a couple of years ago. No one has ever told me no. Let me take just a few minutes and share with you a few experiences that some of the members have had and other experiences that I've had. We promise you, to begin with, as missionaries, that if you will take and read what is marked and then give it to a non-member friend, you will have a special, personal, spiritual experience. And without fail, this occurs. One of our stake missionaries took it to one of our member homes. They gave them that promise. The members took the book, read it, really enjoyed it, and their testimonies were refreshing, and they loved what they had seen and felt. But then they took the book and laid it down on the table in the living room. And there the book sat for nearly 3 weeks. Finally, one afternoon, their non-member daughter-in-law came into the home. Now, the daughter-in-law's attitude has always been this: you can talk to me about anything you want to talk about, but don't you talk to me about the church. And she meant it. She really meant it. I mean, after all, there's a special saying that you will love: your judgment is only as good as your information. Now, from the information she had, she was totally correct. She had no business learning about you Mormons. However, this afternoon, that one afternoon, when she walked into the home, no one was in the house except her mother-in-law, who was back in the back of the house working. The daughter-in-law went in and sat down on the living room couch. And there the book was. There it is. They're always talking about it. And she picked it up. And she started thumbing through it. Her eyes fell upon some of the markings. Wonder why they marked that. And she read it. She kept thumbing through, found a few more markings, and she read them. And she read them. She realized what was going on in the markings. She started back at page 1 and started all over again. About an hour later, she put the book under her arm, and with tears coming down her face, she went into the back of the house and said, "Mom, I'm ready to be baptized." Okay? One of our members was also promised that they would have that special experience. They read it and laid it down. They wanted to give it to somebody, but they didn't know who. Well, the following week, a non-member truck driver friend of theirs happened to come into town. He called them on the phone, and they invited him over to dinner. After dinner, they'd been talking about one thing and then another. Then they asked him the question, "Has anyone ever told you why Mormons are really called Mormons? Would you be offended if we offered to tell you?" And they told him the story. Well, he took the book graciously and put it in the truck seat, and there it went sat. And then he drove back home, which was back east. He got out of the truck, went into the house, and put the marked book in the bookshelf. Weeks passed by. Months passed by, and he was back and forth on his trips. Well, finally, many months later, his wife was going through doing the spring cleaning. Dusting away, she got to the bookshelf, and there that book was. And she said, "Where did that come from?" And she pulled it out of the shelf, and she opened it up, And there in the front of the book was the name of her husband and herself from their good friends over in Mesa. When did they give us that? I don't remember getting that book. And she opened it and started thumbing through it. She saw the various markings. One marking in particular hit her hot button. It said, "What happens after death?" She had just had a tragic experience in her life, and that caught her attention, and she read. She kept thumbing through, finding the markings and reading them, and then she just started back at the beginning and fell on through. Well, by the time he got home from his next trip, she had practically finished the whole book. She was so excited about what she was finding because all of a sudden, all of the problems and all of the trials and the tribulations that she was having in her life were being solved from here. He came home and she could hardly wait to share with him what she had found. 4 weeks later, they were baptized. Okay? One afternoon I was working over in Mesa, and I happened to visit with a Spanish family. They grew up in Lehi. Now you might know that Lehi is Mormon town in Mesa. But I said they grew up in Lehi. They grew up with all of the people in Mesa that are anybody. They know everybody that's anybody in Mesa. That is their life. And they're good Catholic people. Very good Catholic people. Well, there in their home, I asked them the question, has anyone ever told you why Mormons are really called Mormons? No. Well, would you be offended if we offered to tell you? Well, of course not. And I sat there at their kitchen table and told them the story, and then went out to the car and brought in their gift. Guess who joined the church? All of those years, they didn't know why we're really called Mormons. Last Christmas time, as many of you did, I took my family over to the temple and to see the beautiful Christmas lights. This one particular evening, I saw one of the guides. I had just been to their sacrament meeting and given this presentation to them. I went up to the guide and we were visiting there for a moment, and he was visiting with a young man who had all of his camera equipment set up, taking pictures of all of the pretty lights. All of a sudden, it was obvious the young man was not a member of the church. Well, one thing led to another, and finally I was able to say, has anyone ever told you why Mormons are really called Mormons? Would you be offended if I offered to tell you? And we went over and sat down on one of those cold benches, and on the back of the program that they were using that night, we told the story. And then but my problem was I didn't have the gift to give him, so I got his name and address. He lived in California, and he was leaving the next morning to go back home. So the following day, I called the California mission, got hold of the name of the missionaries that were working in his area, and sent a letter to them and a letter to him, and with a copy of the letters to each other, so that they knew that they were going to have to meet each other. Well, one thing led to another, and guess who was baptized just last week? Look what would have happened if we would have missed asking him that night if he knew why Mormons were called Mormons. A couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to go to Europe on business, and it was strictly pressure trip, no pleasure about it. Well, on this one weekend while in Paris, I was able to miraculously find my way to the mission home. After being there at the mission home and sharing these ideas with the mission president, he gave me 6 copies of the book in French and 6 Joseph Smith pamphlets. Well, I took them back home back to the hotel, and throughout the night I was going from the English version to the French version, trying to figure out the pages. And after I had them all figured out, I marked a book. Now listen, there's a good lesson here. After the book was marked, and I had my pamphlet, I said, now wait, what am I going to do? Who am I going to give this to? So I went downstairs to the lobby, and there the night clerk was. And I went in with the Joseph Smith pamphlet first. And I said to him, today someone gave me this pamphlet, and it's written in French, and I don't read French. Would you read it and tell me what it's all about? Is that sneaky? Well, anyway, I came back a little while later. He had read it, and he gave me a perfect first discussion. It was great. Well, then I took the book, and I said, well, they also gave me this book, and it's all marked up, and it's written in French. Would you like to read it and tell me what it's all about? And gave him the book. Well, guess who ended up being baptized? On the way home, on the last trip over, I had to make 3 trips, and on the last trip over, a young couple was sitting by me who were French. They too could only speak a little bit of English, but in what little way we could, I asked them if they knew why Mormons were called Mormons and if they would be offended if I offered to tell them. And then I said, I have these pamphlets, this book. They're written in French. Would you like to read them and tell me what they're all about? We gave it to them, and guess who joined the church when they got back home? Well, I spent an enormous amount of money going back and forth to Europe on that business adventure, and I didn't make a nickel. But you know what? The money that was spent was about as much money as I would have spent if I would have been on another full-time mission. And I thought it was just exciting to be able to have that experience.